Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next of our Essential series. These are topical, engaging and technical webinars on wealth and wellness by leaders in the private client world. As you probably know by now, I'm Lottie, founder of the Jura Society, a network and private client consultancy focusing on women, wealth and well-being. Today, I'm really pleased to invite Jill Clifford, financial planner at Quilter Cheviot Financial Planning, to provide an overview of pension planning for lawyers and accountants. Jill's going to focus on those recently promoted to partnership role within practice and the importance of making pension contributions as soon as possible. As always, if you could ask any questions in the chat, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. The session will be recorded and we hope you enjoy. So I'm just going to bring Jill in now. 2 seconds. Hi, Jill.
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Lottie.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It was a great opportunity, and thank you, Lottie, for giving me this platform to discuss pension planning with you. This webinar has come about because I spend quite a lot of time speaking with lawyers and accountants. We're quite often thinking about the best outcomes for our clients. And as part of that, we often discuss some of the options that are available to them. So we quite often touch upon pension planning and provisions, and quite often it raises a number of eyebrows with lawyers and accountants when we're talking about and touching upon some of those little tips and little things that you can do within your pension that often gets me wondering if perhaps we don't look quite as closely at our own plans. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to discuss pensions, and this presentation will take about 20 minutes. We'll talk about some of the benefits of pensions. We talk a little bit about the gender pay gap, but then we'll talk a bit more in detail about that transition from an associate salaried partner into an equity partner, and some of the options and some of the tools that you can look at in terms of pension planning and provision. So I'm now going to move on to my first slide. And this simply tells us why we should have a pension. So there are a couple of things here, and for most of us, we know that there are some great tax efficient benefits of pension planning. But you can start contributing into a pension even if you're not earning. The maximum you can contribute is £3,600, and that's a net contribution of £2,880. So whilst that might seem small in the scheme of things, you can consider that along for planning for children, grandchildren, and aunts, uncles, grandparents can also make some contributions into that. So it's a great way to get your children planning at a very early age. It's never too soon to start planning. So as soon as you are working and contributing, and in most cases today, you will be looking at a workplace pension scheme provided initially by your employer. And it's really important to be looking carefully at what that looks like in those very early years to get into that mindset. And then save as much as you can. So as well as other financial planning, you might be thinking about saving for your first home. It could be for upsizing if the family is expanding, or maybe school fees planning. But your pension plan should be an integral part of that planning. Also, at the same point, you need to be risk aware. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in detail towards the end of this presentation. As I've mentioned, pensions are hugely tax efficient, and it's unlikely for most of us that our state provision, whilst reasonably generous, will not be sufficient to support us in our retirements and the plans that we would like to have. So this slide just summarises some of those benefits. So you get tax relief on those contributions that go in, £80 for every £100 you put in. It's a net contribution of 80 to you. The pension pot grows free of taxes. You have a lump sum allowance that's typically 25%, but that's up to a limit now. And then finally, you can use this for estate planning purposes and intergenerational wealth planning for the next generations. So I've mentioned here, and I won't spend much time on this one because I've already mentioned about starting to save literally when you start in your first role. Get into the mindset of thinking about it and planning alongside. Review it regularly. So as your career progresses and your salary increases, keep considering what you're contributing into the pension and review it. We're always happy to assist with any financial planning requirements that you have, just to ensure that you remain on track to have that pension provision when you are reaching retirement. And then finally, as you get to retirement, we can start using tools such as cash flow modelling, and I'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. But also we want to make sure as you reach retirement, what the options are for you to draw your pension, other resources that you may have available to you, and also what the pension provision is going to look like. I also wanted to mention here that on a recent report, and I know Lottie has talked about this quite a bit within some of her essential webinars too, that by the late 50s, women's pensions wealth is equivalent to less than 2/3 of a man's pension plan. So it's really important that we address this, and that's partly to do with our lifestyle patterns and partly to do with the gender pay gap. So obviously if women are earning less, then it's likely that they're putting less contributions into the plan. However, there are a couple of good news stories within that. It isn't significant to breach the gap, so it is really important that we keep addressing that and raising awareness of it, and then working together with financial planning to ensure that we are bridging those gaps where appropriate to be able to do so. But some of those good news stories are that women are participating more in their pensions through their 30s and 40s. They are possibly likely to be employed in roles within the civil service, where you still get a lovely final salary type pension scheme where there's no risk with you, but you get a guaranteed income in retirement, which is great. And men quite often want to retire sooner than what women do, and that helps to boost women's pensions and reduce that gap. It's not significant enough to reduce that headline number I've mentioned up there. So it's really, really important that we continue to get that message out there and continue to look at ways that we can support women and increasing those contributions where possible. So now I'm coming on to discussing with you the implications of moving and transitioning from an associate salaried partner to an equity partner. And as you can clearly see within this particular slide, as an associate salaried partner, you get quite a lot of benefits. So you get the workplace pension scheme. So that would be typically something that you would start when you join the firm. There would be an employer contribution to that, and there would be your own matching contributions. You would get a benefits package that would probably include health insurance, critical illness insurance, and income protection. So if you were unwell, you would probably continue to be paid. And you also might benefit from some club memberships with a nice, attractive discount to that membership too. And as you can see, when you reach equity partner, there is very little on the slide. And that's because you become wholly responsible for those benefits packages. So again, it's as part of planning, it's always quite useful to think about, to think ahead as your career is progressing, that yes, I'm going to be achieving an equity partner role. It could be within 2 to 3 years, and therefore let's start thinking what that's going to look like. In particular, with the focus being on pensions here, whilst a workplace pension might be suitable when you start employment, when you reach equity partner, you might want to look at something that is much more tailored to your benefits package and how you're drawing your salary and your benefits as well. So you might need to think about something like a SIP that could be much more tailored to your requirements. And And that might mean consolidating your workplace pension, or it might mean continuing to run that alongside that. But those are things that we can look at as part of financial planning. You also might, as an equity, well, the likelihood is as an equity partner, you will need to take out an equity loan as well to support that partnership. So there's quite a lot of things there to consider, and it's always quite useful to think about those in conjunction with pension planning and provision. So moving on, so whilst I've talked quite a lot there about some of the benefits of pensions and what you may need to consider when you are transitioning from an associate to an equity partner, it's a really good opportunity to be able to reassess where you are within your financial circumstances. I've put a case study together. Kate Robinson and her husband James are completely fictitious. They're not a client, but it's just to show an example of some of the things I can do when we are looking at financial planning. So Kate Robinson is 36. She's a partner in a law firm. She earns approximately $260,000 per annum. She's been a partner for a couple of years now. She's married to James, who's also a partner in a law firm, and he's earning £500,000 a year. They have two children, Charlotte, who's 7, and Jack, who's 4, and they are thinking about their future financial plans. They want to upsize at some point in the future because the family continue to grow, and they've got to consider school fees planning as the children's education progresses. Kate's also concerned that she isn't making sufficient provisions for her retirement. So there's a number of assumptions when we're looking at various cases. They've got a mortgage of approximately $250,000. They've got a nice home. They spend roughly about £100,000 per annum. Kate is making contributions to a pension of £26,000, and James is contributing £10,000 because he is subject to tapered annual allowance, which limits him to what he can put into his pension. I'm not going to talk in detail about tapered annual allowance, but I can discuss that as an aside or separately if anybody does have any questions about that. So now I'm going to move on to just show you what that might look like in terms of a cash flow model. And I appreciate this is probably very small on your screen, so I will talk through some of this chart and what it means in essence. And if we did this together as part of a review, it would be much bigger and much more tailored to your specific needs. So along the bottom horizontal axis here, this is the age of both Kate and James, and up the vertical axis, you have got their overall wealth. The very pale blue line is their essential expenditure, and the black line is their total expenditure. I like to break expenditure down into those needs because it's quite important when you are looking at planning to make sure we are covering 100% of the time that essential expenditure. These blue columns are your income, and you can clearly see on this plan that they've got surplus to requirements. Now, on cash flow modelling that we use here, this surplus to requirements is assumed, unless we do something with it, that it is spent. They will retire James first at age 68 and then Kate at 68 a few years later. And then they will get state pensions, and the orange is their pension provision. You will note into their later years that they run out of money. So it's really important that we work, and these tools are great. They're interactive, the visuals, we can look at all sorts of assumptions with them, and we can work with you in respect of that to look at various different scenarios in terms of pension provisions. So as I mentioned, Kate is contributing £26,000 to her pension. That, as Kate is an additional rate taxpayer, means she gets tax relief at 45%, which means an effective cost to Kate of 14,300. So it's really attractive tax relief when you look at it like that in terms of what pension planning might look like. So what does that look like in terms of her contributions over her working life and what she and James may get in retirement? So we can use tools within cash flow modelling to show insights as to what if this continue on exactly the same path, we don't make any changes whatsoever. As I said, there are assumptions factored into this, such as inflation and increases in expenditure over years, but they are sort of nominal expenditures. And again, we can talk in more detail about what those assumptions would be. But you can see here, if Kate retires at age 68, she's likely to retire with an income of around about 82,000. That's after taxes. But as I mentioned previously, with those contributions at 26,000, she is unlikely, and James is unlikely to have sufficient to retire. And therefore, it is something that we should really look at addressing. So if I move on, what does it look like if Kate adds £60,000 to her pension? And I've used 60 because that's the current annual allowance available for contributions to your pension in the current tax year. Again, because she's a 45% taxpayer, she gets relief at that rate, and the effective cost to Kate is 33,000. So it really is quite a compelling reason to look at increasing and maximising those contributions where you can. So what does that look like on the cash flow? So again, exactly the same principles, but what I've done is just increased Kate's contribution to 60,000 per annum. You can see along the blue lines at the very beginning and moving forwards that the surplus income requirements, whilst it's still there, it has reduced to take into effect the 60,000 contribution. However, she's still got surplus requirements, so they can think about school fee planning, and they can also think about upsizing, which again were part of the planning objectives that they were looking at for the future. So that's great to be able to provide Kate and James with that reassurance. Well, actually, Kate can afford these pension contributions and still be able to do the other things as well. But it also, so the principle's still the same, they both retire at the age of 68. Their net income as a result of that increase moves up to £104,000. And also, and more importantly, it means that they would not run out of money based on the other assumptions remaining the same throughout their lifetime. So it's really an effective tool. The additional contribution, the net cost to Kate, means that they've got peace of mind, that they've got the potential income that they need for their retirement. So it's a really, really good opportunity to be able to demonstrate and use this with clients in reviews and to support your own financial planning. I also want to highlight at this stage another opportunity to boost your pension contributions and pension provisions. And we can do this, we can also help and support doing this by using carry forward. So if you have the availability and you haven't maximised the pension in the current tax year, which we know Kate hadn't in this case, she's got an available annual allowance of £60,000. She's utilised 26, so we've got available £34,000. I've also, just as an example, again, just highlighted here that Kate's contributions for the previous 3 tax years were also less than the annual allowances that were available at that time. So as a result of that, as long as we maximise the use of the annual allowance in the current tax year, you can go back 3 previous tax years and boost your pension contributions in such a way. And we have tools that I am able to use with you to be able to demonstrate that. So in this case, Kate has a total contribution that she is able to make of 136,000. That's a gross contribution, so net to her will be significantly less as a result of that. The one caveat on using carry forward is Kate must have earnings that match that one-off contribution in the tax year that she's going to do it. And in this case, because she's earning £260,000, she will have that available allowance to be able to do that. Now, I haven't mapped that into that cash flow model because the previous contribution of £60,000 demonstrated, based on everything else remaining the same, they've got that potential income to be able to meet their lifestyle requirements in retirement. However, this additional contribution would help boost that initial income into retirement as well. So it's really a useful and quite compelling tool to be able to support and complement the reviews that we can do with you, the use of cash flow models that I can use with you, and to complement that, the use of carry forward to help demonstrate what you're able to add to your pension. And finally, I just wanted to touch upon some other allowances. You're likely to know and be aware of these, but obviously there's the annual ISA allowance, that's £20,000. You get great tax reliefs within that, similar to pensions, but it comes out of net. Any savings and contributions you make into an ISA come out of your net pay, but anything you take out at the other side is not subject to tax at all. Junior ISAs, and in this case, we would be contributing to ISAs for Charlotte and Jack, but each child can have an annual allowance of £9,000 to save tax efficiently. Parents have to set these up, but grandparents, aunts, uncles can also contribute to them. Please note that junior ISAs will become the child's outright at the age of 18, and the providers will write direct to them. So you may not necessarily want them to have too much too soon, and therefore it might be useful to think about starting that pension earlier while they're not earning, and use that £3,600 gross payment to complement what you're doing with the junior ISA. And then finally, I just wanted to touch upon VCTs and EIS. These are venture capital trusts and enterprise investment schemes. They can be complex instruments, but again, I can support you in looking at those as an alternative option to pension planning. Now, I mentioned James typically was earning £500,000, and I did that deliberately because, as I mentioned, he was subject to tapered annual allowance. That means James can only put £10,000 per annum to his pension, but he could use a vehicle such as a VCT and EIS to get some of those tax breaks. So again, we can use these alternative vehicles to help support the pension planning and other resources and savings plannings too. And just one final outcome is just to be aware that from April 2024, the lifetime allowance was officially abolished, and we have a new lump sum allowance and a new death benefit lump sum allowance. So that's the end of the presentation. I just want to say thank you again, Lottie, for giving me the opportunity and the platform to be able to discuss pensions in a little bit more detail, and the use of some of those tools to help support clients and partners with their own financial planning needs. I would be happy to take any questions if there is any.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jill. That was really, really comprehensive overview on pensions and actually the importance of starting young, which I think a lot of us forget. And one question that I do have is really about, the risk-return relationship and how this applies to pensions. So in terms of the risk that your risk appetite and when you're younger, how does this need to be reviewed at varying stages of pension planning?
That's a really important question, Lottie, because in the early years of pension planning, if you are prepared and have the risk appetite, because you can't touch your pensions until, well, for most people, it'll be either between the age of 55 and 58. And when you're starting out on your career, that's an awful long time. to be able to plan and to save. And therefore, you have the ability to be able to take a lot more risk within your pension in those early years, because if you do experience volatility within it, you've got time on your side to see that pension pot recover and then continue to grow. And it's really important to look at that, to coincide that with the contributions we've made. And whilst we touched upon the contributions within the cash flow, the risk profile also makes some assumptions within cash flow modelling as well, depending on where that client's attitude to risk would be. So it's quite important when you're looking at the combination of contributions and risk to sort of help to guide and support clients or colleagues with that risk appetite and that education piece around what risk appetite is. And for most people I speak to, and most women I've spoken to regarding risk, it's not that they're afraid to take risk, they need to be risk aware. And that's really important. If they're informed about what risk looks like and understand the implication, the downside risks and the potential returns as a result of that, then they're more likely to be able to take or have the appetite to take on more risk. Got to take into account.
I think as well, it might be useful for anybody who's not familiar with risk in this context to give a little overview of what risk means in terms of a pension, because that can be quite a broad and quite a startling word, I think, for a lot of people when they're like, I don't want to take risk. Yeah. I don't know if you can just give a little overview of what risk actually means when we're talking about it in this context.
Yeah. So this is investment risk. So once you've set your pension up and you've decided on the contribution you want to make into it, you've got to then put it into a fund or a portfolio and then build up that fund or portfolio. So it's the investment risk that goes with it. If we look at different asset classes, people think about cash and put things into cash as savings. Well, over the longer term, savings rates are unlikely to mean that you will achieve the growth in that pension pot that you want through your lifetime by remaining in cash. So you have to take an element of investment risk to support that pension planning and the growth in that plan. So it's really looking at the different levels of risk and the different possibilities in terms of potential returns and potential risk to accept where your level of risk and risk appetite sits, because the important aspect is making sure you're taking enough risk to achieve your objectives over the longer term, but not too much risk that you won't be able to sleep at night and are worrying about market volatility as a result of that and ring me up and say, Jill, I'm really concerned about what's going on here. Should I be taking less risk on or not? But the key aspects also is the timing. So very early on, when you're starting out on that career, as I've mentioned, it's going to be a long time before you can actually access that pension. And therefore, you can afford to take more risk because you can see the volatility within the portfolio recover and then continue to grow. And again, working alongside someone like myself, we can help in that guidance and education process. But it's important as you continue to review that pension that you reassess that risk in terms of changes to your circumstances, to legislation circumstances as well. And as you get nearer to the retirement, you might want to lock in some of that value and reduce that level of risk. Now, when you reduce risk, you're reducing the volatility. And the volatility is the bit that makes the portfolio fall in value. And the potential returns are the bits that you see when the pension then continues to grow. And that does happen, and it will happen throughout the lifetime of your pension pot. You'll see it go down in value, but eventually over the long term, the expectation you will see it grow. And so it's taking the appropriate level of risk at the right time and the different stages of your pension planning.
And I think that segues really nicely into actually just touching on something that not many people are talking about or haven't been previously, annuities. How do these fall into part of pension planning? And what are they, perhaps, for anybody who's maybe a bit too young to have seen them as a flavour of the week?
So yes, again, Lottie, another very, very good question. Annuities fell out of favour, and they fell out of favour when we got freedom of pensions, when you got much more flexibility around what you could do with your pension. And in fairness, this presentation has all been about the flexibility of what you can do with that pension. Now, annuities are starting to look a lot more favourable. Why? Because we've seen an increase in interest rates. And annuities are a guaranteed, you give up the right to a lump sum to give a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. And for some people, that's really attractive because they don't like the responsibility of having to manage a pot of money within a pension and support that income requirement throughout their retirement. So, and it can work if you've got multiple resources. You can take a lump sum from any resource. You don't necessarily have to use the pension, and you can get a quote as to what that lump sum might give you as a guaranteed income in retirement. So it can work alongside a pension quite flexibly, or it might be something you want to buy outright with your pension pot. But the interest rates, because previously interest rates were really low, they came out of favour because you couldn't buy much with that lump sum, and so the income looked really inadequate to support you through your lifetime, and therefore people preferred the flexibility of the pension. They're now showing so much more interest because interest rates have gone up, and therefore you can almost buy more with your money. And I quite like to look at them as an option. Sorry.
The only thing though is, don't they then fall out to your estate? So it becomes taxable when you are doing estate planning. So that's one of the considerations that you do need to make alongside having, again, thinking of risk and return and actually, is this suitable? Yes, you're getting that guaranteed benefit, but actually later down the line, if you have put a significant lump sum into it, your family might not be able to benefit from that.
That's right. But if you've got other resources available as alongside your pension, so you've been using other provisions and savings as well, you might want to use those provisions, those savings, to buy that annuity and not necessarily the pension, because the pension, as you rightly say, has got so many other benefits, and you can use that for intergenerational wealth. So the annuity could complement the pension, and it could be taken out of assets that are subject to inheritance tax, let's say, for example. So you don't necessarily have to use the pension.
And this is where planning is so important.
Yeah. And so you could do that to complement it. It'd be right for some people, but it won't be right for others. And the other benefits, how I like to look at them as well, if you can look at guaranteeing that income. So when we touched upon those essential expenditures on the cash flow, if we can support with guaranteed income that essential expenditure throughout your lifetime, it's a huge tick in the box. One, to give you peace of mind that you've got enough income to meet those essential costs. And two, it then gives us the flexibility to be able to do lots of other things with your pension provisions or other resources that you have. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the pension that you can buy that annuity with. It could be other resources that you have available too.
I think that's great. And also, I guess, we touched on it slightly about carry forward as well for pensions, and how actually when you're getting that huge tax uplift, if you are at a higher earnings rate, then you're going to benefit from that as you start to reduce your tax bracket as you get to retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really good if you can do that in the early stages. So maximising as much contribution into your pension as you can. And as you review it and reassess as your career moves on, if you've not used those allowances and you've got surplus cash that you're able to do it, it's a really good opportunity to reassess and do it while you can. Because if your earnings as a partner continue to rise, and for lots of people they will do as that career progresses and they become much more senior, they might be limited because of caught by tapered annual allowance and what they then can contribute to their pension. And that could be the same time that they're thinking, I need to revisit my pensions because I'm now thinking within the next 5 to 10 years I might be retiring, and then suddenly find you're limited because of what your earnings might be.
And also, I suppose it might be useful to point out for business owners. So, say somebody is runs a practice, making those contributions to their employers is taxable benefit for the company as well.
It's if the employer, it's much more tax efficient for the company to make a pension contribution on behalf of its employer or as a director of that company, because it comes out as an allowable expense. So much more beneficial to a company.
It's brilliant. Have you got any final comments? I don't know, maybe your top 3 things that anybody who's watching this might, if they're like, okay, that might be helpful, or that top 3 things to summarize for what somebody might like to consider.
So my top 3 takes from this is pensions are hugely tax efficient. Do not be put off by legislation changes and the noise you hear from governments. Always speak to someone like myself, because we will tell you what you can and cannot do. They remain tax efficient, and therefore you should use the benefits while you can. Start early and build that mindset. Keep the affordability factors for your pension alongside each and every other part of your financial planning through your working lifetime, and seek advice. Happy to support anybody where they've listened to this presentation and they want to discuss some of the aspects a little bit more. Seek advice, seek support to help build that provision.
Yeah, because it's something where you don't really want to take a gamble on it. It's hugely important, and that you make it align with your goals, and you seek advice with the tax planning and all of the other complex bits. You don't want to trip up in that area at all. But thank you so much, Jill, and thank you to everybody else for tuning in. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Jill directly on LinkedIn, or her information was shared on the slides as well, if you want to just rewind a little bit. Otherwise, I'm always very happy to connect you as well. But thank you again. Hugely, hugely interesting and important topic.
And thank you, Lottie. Really appreciate the time you've given me to talk about this very important topic.
You're welcome, Jill. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.